Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. On the 7th of September, US President Donald Trump tweeted that he had cancelled meetings planned for the next day with Taliban leaders and Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and called off peace negotiations on Afghanistan. The immediate reason he cited was a Taliban attack in Kabul that had killed 12 people, including an American soldier. Later, he said that the talks were dead. Afghanistan has been ravaged by war since 2001 when a US-led coalition overthrew the Taliban. There are about 14,000 US plus another 17,000 NATO troops in Afghanistan. The Taliban have demanded a complete withdrawal of foreign troops. Since October 2018, Taliban representatives and US officials have been meeting in Doha, Qatar, trying to thrash out a peace treaty. Many security analysts in Afghanistan and elsewhere had criticized the US-Taliban talks as it had kept the Afghanistan government out. Many believe that the talks would legitimize Taliban. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the Afghanistan situation post the cancelling of peace talks between the United States and Taliban. Joining me on the program today are Shakti Sinha, Foreign Affairs expert, Jaidev Ranade, strategic expert and former Additional Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, and Vivek Karju, former ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. At the beginning of this month, several experts and panelists were worried about which way the US-Taliban talks were headed. They were talking about how it's not headed in the right direction and this could lead to a lot of problems. 15 days into the month, now we are looking at a completely different picture as far as Afghanistan is concerned.
I think many people were worried about the process which was undertaken by the American negotiators in talking to the Taliban. As your commentaries put it well, the fact that the Afghan government was excluded at the behest of the Taliban, in fact the insistence of the Taliban itself was causing a lot of concern all over. But I think by the time this month began, the voices that started emerging from around the talks indicated that a finalization had been reached, and in fact Zalmay Khalilzad so told the Afghan press too that a text had been negotiated and that the final decision would be taken by President Trump. Therefore, when Trump said that the talks were over and that grand drama that he wanted to enact at Camp David would not take place, it left many people absolutely stunned, because this was a reversal of all the process that had taken place. And today, I think we are in the doldrums, because even though Trump has said that the talks are dead, he has not indicated what will he now do. And that is important, because till these talks began, there were 2 years of a military and political stalemate. And in that stalemate, if an advance had been made, even an incremental advance, it had been made by the Taliban, and supporting them was Pakistan.
Right.
On the receiving end was the Afghan government. The political consensus in Kabul was fraying, and while the security forces, while they were able to keep a holding operation going, they were not able to throw back the Taliban. So the question now is, what will take place today? Now.
Sure. All right. Mr. Sinha, let me bring you into the picture now. So let's look at it from an Indian perspective and what the U-turn of President Trump and the Taliban really means for India. Is it good for India?
It's a little early to say that whether it's good for India or not, in the sense that if you look at the position in Afghanistan, as Ambassador Karju very rightly said, the political consensus within that country, among the elite of that country, has not fraying, has frayed. Everybody in that elite has been running around and meeting the Taliban at various conferences in Moscow and elsewhere, peace conferences, not peace talks. The government itself has been very keen on talking to the Taliban. So you had created a situation where countries like India were friends of Afghanistan. We're not friends of a politician or that group, whatever people say. We are friends of the country of Afghanistan. We really don't know what is going to happen. Nobody knows what is going to happen in Afghanistan. And President Trump, as you know, said no to talks with North Korea 3 times before he went to met the North Koreans. So is the peace talks dead? I don't know. Will it be revived? We don't know. If Trump has to get his troops out of Afghanistan, he has to make some sort of deal with somebody. So in this confused situation, I mean, we would like peace in Afghanistan. We would not like Afghanistan to be a safe haven for terrorists to operate in India, parts of India. We wouldn't want that to happen. You obviously want a broad-based government in Afghanistan which has abjured terrorism. So Taliban coming to power upset people, but the existing situation deteriorating is also equally upsetting. So really at this stage for India really to know whether the end of the talks or the pause button, we don't know what it is, how it is going to, I mean, I can't say it with any amount of certitude what exactly is in India.
Okay, I'm going to come back to this, Ambassador. I'd like to hear your thoughts as well on, on the India angle. But before that, Mr. Ranade, what does all of this mean for the region? Because there are several stakeholders as far as Afghanistan is concerned. So what does it mean for the region?
Well, I think we are, as Shakti put it, we are at a very, shall I say, it's a pause or a delicate stage right now. One doesn't know how things are going to pan out in the future. But 2 or 3 quick points on what you said. The first is, I think, as far as Afghan President Ghani is concerned, he seems to have got a lease of life now. Considering that the elections are coming up, I think he'll be able to move and try and consolidate his group. And he will be looking at maybe greater authority coming to him. The second is that, of course, the American negotiator Zalmay Khalilzad, who has got enough shall I say, opponents within the Beltway, would also come under fire for the deal that he put together. And particularly, people in the region would point to the fact that by going with the Taliban, what he has done is in fact given Pakistan a leverage at a time when the Americans are not happy with it, and by extension, the Chinese. The other factor is the manner in which the Taliban, which seems to have got a jolt, in fact, I would say they have got a jolt, because they thought things were moving okay. And in their calculation, I'm not justifying it, but in their calculation, 1 American soldier dead doesn't really matter. But that was cited by President Trump when he said that the talks are dead. And the word he used was they're dead. So in other words, there's a finality there. But they went rushing off to Moscow to try and, I'm sure, try and see, whether they can resuscitate the talks or try and get something going, which of course keeps China in the picture. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. The mood in, I would say, in Islamabad and to an extent in Beijing would be a bit down, because they won't appreciate the way things are moving. But finally, let me just conclude by saying that even if this deal had gone through, it was part one of the larger picture. I mean, it was less than or just about 1/3 of the American forces who were going to be pulled out over a 5-month period, when anything could have gone wrong. And that would have also taken Trump through his election or closer to his election, which I think is also a crucial factor here.
Absolutely. All right, Ambassador, I'm going to come back to the India angle yet again, because I think let's focus on that for some time. So does this now give India, in the words of Mr. Ranade, a fresh lease of life?
I don't think we had ever lost a lease of life in Afghanistan. The Afghan political class essentially wants a relationship with India. I believe that whoever is really an authority in Kabul wants close ties with us, because they think that it is in their interests, in their national interests.
Even Taliban?
Taliban was an aberration. However, it's no secret that during the Taliban period too, there were probes by them, and there were indications being given, and those indications have continued even now by them, that India should not take them as a Pakistan proxy, that they have an independent view on these, on the region and how it should be organized. Now, I think we pursued a correct policy in the sense that we have built close ties with the legitimate government of Afghanistan. The problem during the Taliban period was that it was not the legitimate government, it was not the government recognized by the international community, except 3 countries, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, no one recognized them, and the UN seat was held by the government of President Rabbani. So our policy was absolutely correct at that stage. After 2001, once the Taliban were ousted, we've developed excellent relations with the Afghan government. We have a strategic partnership arrangement, and I do believe we should do everything in our power to continue with these ties, continue with the elements of the strategic partnership agreement, including in its security and its developmental aspects. Having said this, I do believe that we should also reach out to all elements in the Afghan political process, and that, whether one likes it or not, includes the Taliban. The Taliban today have been more or less internationally legitimized, notwithstanding Trump saying the talks are dead, I won't talk, the Taliban are no longer welcome, etc. The fact is that this process itself has legitimized them, and that is why once the talks did not take place, Moscow is welcoming. So, why should we deny ourselves the opportunity to build contacts with the Taliban, which doesn't mean that we are endorsing what they say, which doesn't mean that we endorse their actions, but the diplomatic game is played in this fashion that you keep contacts with everyone, while, I will emphasize again, keeping all elements of our strategic partnership agreement going with the legitimate government, which is the government in Kabul, and after the election process, hopefully it will move ahead smoothly. Whichever government then comes, we continue doing business with that government.
Okay, all right. But do you see the elections happening? Because they've been postponed, on several occasions.
Well, as of now, the elections are going to take place. Whether they will be smooth, whether they will appear to be credible, is another question. I myself believe that a lot of the ills of what happened after September of 2014 can be attributed to the disastrous elections which were maneuvered against Dr. Abdullah. That's a hard fact. No one can deny it. And that led to the fraying of the Kabul political elite, and we know the result 5 years later.
All right. So, Mr. Sinha, what does India continue to do going forward? Is it going to be more of what we've seen over the last decade and a half? Do we try something new going forward? What should our focus and what should our strategy be?
See, one is very clear, and is that for Afghanistan, India is a very important country for various reasons. One is the strategic perspective, but therefore whoever is in Kabul wants India. Other also is in terms of personal requirements, health requirements, education requirements. India is the logical choice. People come to India very often. Government has played a very good role in this over the years. The scholarship that we give, the civil servants we train, and the institutions that we've helped build up, whether it's the parliament, whether it's the power sector, we have done a lot of such work. Our development work definitely has to continue. And now, and this of course depends on the security situation, our ability to take development down to the grassroots is very, very important. We have started it, the small projects. Now the need to upscale it and carry it on at a little provincial scale to make an impact. These don't cost too much money, but they generate a lot of local economic activity. Once you have legitimate economic activity happening, you have politics which is legitimized. Unfortunately, politics has become delegitimized because of various reasons. That is what India is there. But India's positioning as a good player in the area, somebody who wants peace in Afghanistan, gives India a tremendous amount of legitimacy. And the fact that we do not get involved in retail politics. We don't choose winners and losers. We don't get into that game. We've had in the past worked with the legitimate government which had lost support in terms of the physical area of Afghanistan. We continued that support to the government. So we were seen as being pro XYZ. Now that phase is completely over. Now it is an Afghan political establishment going on, and we have to keep engaging with them really well, because they do see you as their good friend. The fact that the Taliban themselves criticized Pakistani Foreign Minister Qureshi when he attempted to link up our government's action in Kashmir 370 with the situation in Afghanistan, within hours the Taliban spokesman condemned it, saying attempts to link up Kashmir with Afghanistan are completely against the interest of peace in Afghanistan. So, even the Taliban recognizes this is no more the 90s. Now that the Taliban is seen across the world, Iran, Moscow, China, they have interacted with the ulema in Indonesia. So the Taliban today has much greater engagement with the world, and therefore if they become part of the past structure in whatever form, obviously India should be engaging with them. So you need political engagement much greater and greater economic engagement.
All right. So Mr. Ranade, taking the discussion forward now, several analysts and everyone believes that the crux of the problem lies in neighboring Pakistan and not in Afghanistan primarily. So where does all of this leave Pakistan?
I think in addition to what has just been said, I think one point was made by both Vivek and Shakti, was in maybe a nuanced way, that the Taliban of today, which is at play in Afghanistan and in talks with, or was in talks with the United States, is different from the Taliban of the past. By that, I would expand that meaning to suggest that the Taliban today is not that much under control of Pakistan or its ISI as earlier they used to be. And therefore, what was said about establishing contacts with the Taliban, I think yes, we should, because there will be areas which we could exploit in that, try and see who is on which side, and work on that particular facet. As far as Pakistan, I think Pakistan has a lot of problems of its own. The fact that these talks between the US and the Taliban have been called off comes at a wrong time for them, psychologically and also optically. So as far as they're concerned, they can't give much succor to Taliban. But I think this contact with Moscow is something that must have happened, behind the scenes. I'm sure the Chinese would have been involved, probably Pakistanis would have been involved. But while I am saying, and I am supporting what has been said earlier about having contacts with the Taliban, I think we should be also careful and wary while we do, because the Taliban has its own religious agenda, and that is something that we do need to keep in mind.
Can I just add a sentence?
Sure.
That I wish the Taliban has become independent of Pakistan. At this stage, they probably haven't become. They may have the potential to become independent. At this stage, they are not in a position really to go very much against Pakistan's interest, very much.
Ambassador, your thoughts on Taliban?
No,
because the Taliban has also threatened dire consequences after the talks have been called off. So what do you make of all of that? Because they also control more than 50% of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
That's the reality at the end of the day.
Look, the Taliban are dependent on the Pakistanis. I agree with Shakti. I don't think they don't like it. No Afghan likes it, to be dependent on anyone else. But that's the reality today. Now, the fact is that the Pakistanis would be despondent that this process in which they had invested quite a bit has not reached fruition. But they have a critical role, in the sense that unless the Americans are able to effectively tackle the Pakistanis, they cannot neutralize the Taliban. And that endeavor they gave up a long time back. Because really, as long as the sanctuaries were there, as long as the Pakistanis could take the Taliban and mesh them further inwards, the Taliban are a going concern. And the Americans knew this. And so the Americans, if they had to really fight the Taliban, had to take the battle across the Durand, which they never did. So today, what has changed? That is the question I ask myself. The nexus between the Pakistanis and the Taliban continues. It is highly unlikely that Trump will invest militarily to try to change the equation. So does he have an alternative but to go back to the negotiating table? That is a question that we must ask ourselves, and that is the question, I think, which gives the Pakistanis a feeling of confidence and assurance that at the end of the day, this guy may do all kinds of drama, but where will he go? Because he will maybe that over the next year, till his elections, he wants a holding operation like Obama did in 2015 and 16. And he may also bring back some 4,000 to 5,000 soldiers. That is what it is reported. Bolton was telling him that you don't have to have this deal, you can bring back people. But it will not really be able to contain the Taliban or move Afghanistan to the next step in reconciliation.
Right. So, Mr. Ranade, let's talk about the legitimate government in Afghanistan as well, because, you know, where do they go from here? What does all of this mean for them?
I think for them, the first thing that they will look at is stabilization of the situation in Afghanistan. To some extent, with the talks having been killed, I think they would feel that they can, need not look over their shoulder that much as things are. But the focus of the president will be on the next elections. That's how I look at it. If they are held, of course. And there are inbuilt problems, in the sense as Vivek just mentioned about Abdullah and Ghani. I think that is there, and it is visible, in fact, when you talk to them. Within the political class in Kabul also, I sense there are quite a few differences that do exist. I don't know how they would mesh with each other, but there are also differences between, the former groupings that existed of Northern Alliance and all that. So I would just say that, we'll have to just wait and see what happens, but I'm not looking for a very relaxed situation in Afghanistan.
Yes, Ambassador.
It's the Hobbesian world.
Mr. Sinha, what's the best way forward then, and what is the game plan as far as the others are concerned, be it Iran, be it Russia, be it China? We've spoken about Pakistan, the United States and India. What about the others?
Generally, these three countries that you mentioned, Iran, Russia and China, are in sync with the Pakistani point of view at this moment of time. In fact, they are the ones who legitimized the Taliban enough so that the Americans could engage with them. And when Americans really ultimately realized that they'll have to talk to the Taliban directly and not through the so-called Afghan-led process, And therefore, these countries have a stake in American embarrassment, in the fact that America has to come down and accept conditions that it can withdraw its troops. Because everybody remembers Saigon 1975, they don't want a repetition of that. And therefore, and they have created this ISIS threat. ISIS is a threat, no doubt about it, but they have exaggerated the ISIS threat in Afghanistan to show the Taliban in a better light. These are our guys now against the ISIS. So these countries have played, I would say, a negative role in that sense in Afghanistan the last few years by creating these complications, which has put the Afghan political establishment on the back foot. The legitimate government of Afghanistan in that sense got pushed back when these countries started openly talking to the Taliban, giving them red carpet treatment, state guests, etc. So that did delegitimize and reduce the credibility. You see, governments require both credibility and legitimacy. This process, they reduced the legitimacy and the credibility. Credibility was weak in any case because the Afghan government cannot ensure security, but it had legitimacy. Thanks to this process, and thanks, as Vivek rightly pointed out, the very, very flawed election process, which went a long way in actually putting people off the democratic processes, So these are the troubles that have happened in that thing. But going forward, nobody knows what's happening. Of course, the Taliban got upset by Trump's decision, though they would rightly ask, 16 US soldiers have died this year. Why on the 16th? Why not on the first 15?
Sure.
And I guess they were more put off by the fact that they wanted to sign the agreement and reach Camp David as victors. Trump wanted them to reach Camp David and then sign the agreement. So there were wheels within wheels, and of course with the spoilers in the room all around. Biggest, of course, being our neighbor. It's going to be very complex, I think, for everybody.
Okay. So on that note then, let's get closing comments from all my guests with the best way forward, because I think we are in agreement that as far as the peace talks are concerned, only the pause button has been hit. What next? Ambassador, starting with you.
Look, the agony of Afghanistan is not going to end any time soon, because even if this had gone through, the grafting of the Afghan emirate into the Afghan constitution, Republic's constitutional processes would have been a tremendously complex and difficult task. So the road ahead was not easy. Unfortunately, the road is not even being taken. And today there is absolute confusion. And the Americans must come out and clear this confusion about what they want. Because let us face it, the principal players in Afghanistan today, whether we like it or not, are the Americans, the Taliban, the Afghan authorities who are very weak, and Pakistan. They are the ones who have to make peace. Others can contribute to the process, but the actual peacemaking is by these people. As far as India is concerned, I think we played the game pretty well till now. Our policies have been right. The only place where I disagree with the government's approach is in not sort of establishing open contacts with the Taliban, because I do believe that our past with them is very difficult. We have very painful memories, but we now need, I think, to establish contact, because they are part of the Afghan political process. Whether we like it or not, they are an entity which are there.
Sure.
So why shouldn't we sort of have contacts with them? ये क्या कि हम रूठे हुए हैं? अगर रूठने से सरकार डिप्लोमेसी नहीं चलती है.
Right, Mr. Ranade.
Well, I just have 2 points here. One, of course, that we should have contacts with the Taliban, however we look at it. But one category which has been ignored in our discussions are the people of Afghanistan. And my conversations, the few that I have had with people who are living in cities in Afghanistan, they have been very apprehensive of the Taliban actually coming to power. In fact, apprehensive would be an understatement for how they feel. But I think they would be relieved to some extent, at least temporarily. The second is, with Trump having decided that the talks are dead just before the Taliban was supposed to come to Camp David, I think it's also put maybe a very, very faint but a question mark on the Taliban and whether they will be able to carry the process forward. I get what Vivek has said about finally they will have to talk. Well, let's see how bold the US government becomes, and it can decide another tack for tackling
All right.
Afghanistan.
And Mr. Sana, close the show for us with the concluding remarks.
Taliban have been obviously put off by this shutting down the talks temporarily. And this rush to Moscow is a desperate rush to get legitimacy. There's no doubt about it. But again, as all of us have agreed that going forward, if America needs to get its troops out, if Trump wants to get his troops out, and there's nobody in America today who's willing to make a case to get troops out, put in some more troops as a short-term measure. Nobody will make the case in America. If America has to get its troops out, you have to talk to them, which is what gives the Pakistanis that confidence that you have to come back to me. I alone can deliver the Taliban, and therefore need for us to not give them so much space.
Okay, all right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback and suggestions with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles @FRP09 and @Rajya Sabha TV. See you again next time.